Okay, so
Hello.
very excited to interview on stage, Cheryl.
Pleasure to be here.
So first of all, I'm Takeshi Ebihara from the Rebright Partners. We've been investing in 18 companies in Southeast Asia as a venture capital seed stage. So I'd like to ask and reveal everything about the Cheryl as an entrepreneur or the now startup backer from the investor's vision in Southeast Asia. Okay, so can you explain yourself very shortly?
Sure. I'm not good at introducing myself, but I'll try. So I'm originally from Malaysia, and after high school, the government of Malaysia offered me a scholarship to study in the US. So I went to Cornell University and studied engineering there, and then stayed back to work in the US, and then started my first company in New York in 2010 called City Pockets. We raised venture capital, about $1 million there, and then kind of did a major pivot, shut down the first company, and then rebuilt the company as Reclipit, moved to Silicon Valley, moved my whole team there as part of 500 Startups Accelerator program, raised a bit more angel investment, and then a year and a half later, we sold to Walmart Labs in 2013. And then after my 1-year golden handcuffs, the government of Malaysia basically came to approach me to take on this role as CEO of MaGIC to basically nurture startups and the local ecosystem in Malaysia. But I told them I wanted to look at it from the ASEAN perspective as well, because I think Malaysia in the 30 million population market is small relatively to ASEAN, which is 600 million people, and that I wanted to kind of help Malaysian entrepreneurs grow beyond just the local markets. So 5 months later, I moved back, and it's been nearly 1 year since I've led MaGIC.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see. So first of all, I'd like to ask some questions about the entrepreneurship as a very experienced and a successful entrepreneur, especially in the U.S. So what lessons have you learned during your entrepreneurship life?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Too many lessons, right? But I think in building my product, my first product, and building the next product, I realized that you really have to build a product that you really understand, and you have to be the expert in your industry, right? So if you're in the affiliate business, you need to know which categories yield the biggest margins and the lowest margins and whatnot. So just, I think the best entrepreneurs solve a problem that they have, and hence they're a super user of the product, right? So that's one. Also, I realized that timing and luck is a big component of it too. I think sometimes you could be building a startup that is just slightly off timing. So you need, as an entrepreneur, that's sort of an intuition and a gut feeling. You have to kind of know where the market is going. If everyone's already there, then you're too late, right? Also, the harder you work, the luckier you get. The whole notion of luck comes into play if you hustle, right? But I think more importantly, what I've really learned, especially starting out in New York City when there wasn't really a tech startup environment, I mean, it was starting to happen in 2010, is that you have to really surround yourself with other people who want to see you succeed. Because I think sometimes, especially in Asia, we tend to think that, hey, we can work on a product and be successful with just a good product, but a lot of times you need a whole community behind you, and I think I realized the concept of traction mentors. So I had a couple of traction mentors, and what a traction mentor is really, if you're raising a seed, that traction mentor has already raised an A. If you're raising an A, that traction mentor has already raised a B. Wow. So you always have to have this kind of this person. He or she doesn't have to be a super successful entrepreneur that's unreachable.
Does that mentor tend to be the investor?
It can be, but I find that I think peer mentoring works better for me, especially in an ecosystem in Asia where there isn't that many success stories yet, right? And then we're always complaining that, oh, there's no people to mentor me. But look for people who are just a few rungs above you.
I see, okay. So I'd like to ask a lot of stupid questions to make this session very practical for the young startups. And I think most of the audience is young startups here in the room. So you mentioned about the hard work. So what is your definition of the hard work?
Of hard work?
Hard work, yes. What is the definition? How hard they have to work?
Well, I think, as Kevin mentioned earlier, I think it's about discipline and focus, right? I think not necessarily hard work, it's about working smart as well. I think a lot of people they're doing too much, especially as founders, CEOs. We are the product person, we're the biz dev person, we're the janitor, we're the intern, we're everything, right? And I think it's really important for us to set our goals and metrics and really be focused about what we want to accomplish.
Okay, I have to be much more stupid. Okay, how many hours you have to work per day?
Oh, well, I mean, when I first started out, as any entrepreneur here know, you work nights and weekends,
Okay.
80 hours a week. There's
Okay.
no sleeping, right?
All right, okay. Next very specific question is what was the most tough part during your entrepreneurship life? The tough part, hardest part?
I think there were a lot of tough parts. I think giving up my fancy life as a management consultant was, I guess that wasn't the toughest part. That was, I had to put my mindset into like a bootstrapping entrepreneur. I think it's the uncertainty, right? I think it's sort of like when you hit a high, it's the highest high, and when you hit a low, it's the lowest low. And so I think you learn a lot about yourself and your true north, what you really want in life, and why are you doing this? What is the meaning of all this struggle, right? And I think that teaches you a lot about life, yeah.
I see. So oppositely, what is the happiest moment during your entrepreneurship life?
So it wasn't like, I mean, of course we were relieved when we got acquired, but I think the happiest point was really going to a random party or going to a random restaurant and people hearing about my startup and coming up to me and telling me that, hey, I'm using your product and I really like it. I think that as an entrepreneur, we are meant to solve problems, big enough problems in the world. And I remember I was traveling out of state to Seattle or something, and I went to a restaurant and someone told me they're using my app. And that was sort of the moment where you're like, wow, okay.
So you're saying that maybe you really feel the traction of the user in your real life, then that makes you happy.
Yeah, like you're solving a real problem, right? You're not just building a product that nobody wants.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about the MaGIC. So can you share about how does MaGIC work, and what does MaGIC have to offer for Southeast Asian startups?
Yeah, so MaGIC stands for the Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Center. It is a fully owned government agency owned by the Ministry of Finance in Malaysia. So the first and foremost mission is to help the local ecosystem, but I think we also have another mission to help Southeast Asian startups as well, because I think, again, like looking at Malaysia, I think we have a lot of stuff going for us in terms of location, language, cost of living, talent pool. I can go a bit deeper into sort of why Malaysia, but the thing I'm most excited to announce, I guess, to participants here is the MaGIC Accelerator program, which we codename MAP. So in July, we will be accelerating 50 high-growth startups and 25 social enterprises, so 75 companies in one cohort. And so it starts from July, and demo days in November, and we run 2 batches every year. So we want to really focus on ASEAN as a region, especially as Malaysia is chairing ASEAN this year in November, that, hey, this is a large opportunity, it's a large market. We can't ignore it. I mean, I think in the past, we tend to be, are we a Singapore startup? Are we a Malaysian startup? Are we a Thai startup? But I think these days we have to change that mentality a little bit. We have to think regional, right? And what I've observed in my past 1 year being back in Southeast Asia is that in the US, you can build what I call a very bottoms-up startup, where a two-person startup can build their company in a garage and gain traction in a very, how do you say it, like homogeneous market in the US, 300 million people, right? But in Southeast Asia, we have a bigger market, 600 million, but it's also very fragmented. Different languages, different culture, you have to be very localized. But I have seen startups from the more top-down approach where they come in with big money, like one example is the rocket internet type startups, or there are a couple of other funds that put in big money into these incubator type startups, and they launch in a couple of markets right away, and you see their valuations just double, triple right off the bat. So I think because Southeast Asia is such a tough market, it's fragmented, you do need a lot more money. And so as you can see, I think there is a lot of venture capital. I actually don't think there's actually a Series A crunch. There's just a lot more money for fewer good startups. So I think startups need to prove a little bit of traction and prove that they're thinking regionally, and then quickly get that funding to grow in a couple markets at a time.
I see. So you guys prefer the regional player instead of the sticking one single market?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always do you start in one market or you start in several markets? I don't think there's a formula for that yet. But coming back to what MaGIC is doing for ASEAN, the MaGIC Accelerator program is the largest. It will be the largest of its kind in terms of a regional accelerator. So applications are now open until, I believe, May 13. So startups can apply map.mymagic.my, and it's actually modeled after Startup Chile.
Yeah. Maybe you guys are familiar with the Startup Chile, very famous, successful, startup acceleration program.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Startup Chile, because they don't really get a lot of applications from Asia because it's too far from Chile. But it is a very successful government-funded program in Santiago, Chile.
Yeah.
They've run it for 3+ years now, and they gave I think $40K USD per startup.
For grant.
Equity free, yeah.
It's a present, right?
Yeah,
Cash
so
present.
they wanted basically to change the mindset of local entrepreneurs in Santiago, in Chile. And the best way to do that is to get seasoned entrepreneurs from everywhere else to come and start companies in Chile. So we took that model, we went to Startup Chile, we signed an MOU with them, but we modified it for what works for Southeast Asia, right? So I think our accelerator program is built on the fundamentals that everyone here has to think regionally, as I mentioned. So it is all about the regional connections, it's all about the regional mentors. And I don't think that people know that 80% of the highest valued tech exits in Southeast Asia are from Malaysia. So we have Dropstreet.com that just exited almost 600 million last year. iProperty, we have, now one of the hottest startups is Grab Taxi. Anthony is speaking at Tech in Asia as well. So there's a lot of regional founders coming out of Malaysia that is now exiting or now starting to give back, and they are all mentors of MAP.
I see. Well, by the way, how do you analyze that fact? I mean, the 80% of the successful startup is coming from Malaysia, what you said.
I think it's listed. I think this is only data from exits, so companies that have exited through a sale or an IPO. And I think on our website, I can't remember, somewhere in our website where we do have this chart that was produced by another tech publication, actually, that shows the highest tech exits. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So, by the way, what is the requirement to apply your MAP? I mean, the accelerator program for you. So, does startup have to live there and work there, or do they have to register their company in Malaysia? Or?
No, they don't have to register in Malaysia at all. It's a 4-month program. Starting in July, ending in November. We pay for your flight up to
good news.
300 USD, because we're, and you don't have to be a Southeast Asian founder. You can be a US founder. You can be
from anywhere, from Japan,
anywhere. As long
Australia,
as
everywhere.
I think we are emphasizing the ASEAN market because we have telco partners, we have route to market partners that will help you gain market access to
the
customer
market
base.
has to be Southeast Asia.
Correct. Yeah.
But the founder can be everywhere.
Yes, but we pay for accommodation for 4 months. We pay a stipend, also about I think 500 USD a month per founder. So we take up to 3 founders per company. So 50 high growth startups and 25 social enterprises. It is a large cohort. It's 75 startups. It's really ambitious, but I think. different from being a private accelerator where I'm an investor and I want to only invest in 10 companies and really handhold them to success. I'm playing more of an ecosystem builder role where it's all about seeding the connections. It's all about making these startups visible. And we have over 350 investors from around the region. I think you're one of them in our database, which we send a monthly newsletter to in terms of the top 10 deals that we see coming out of Malaysia or whatnot. And so we're going to invite the same investors to our investor demo day in November.
I see, understood. There are some, accelerator, incubator all around the Southeast Asia, especially the telco is one of the enthusiastic players to do that business. So what is the very, core difference from them, and the what is your long-term vision for as a MaGIC, as an accelerator? So what is the very characteristic thing and the difference from the other accelerator program?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think different from being a, I guess, investor, a private investor, I think I'm wearing the ecosystem builder hat. So it's all about seeding the regional connections, creating visibility for Malaysia as a platform for regional companies. So when we invite companies to come to Malaysia, we don't force them to register. We don't force them to stay back. In fact, after the program, if they want to have a 1-year visa, they can apply. So again, modeling after the Startup Chile system that works. I think startups should go where they can succeed best, right? And they should look at Malaysia as the place to make the regional connections and get to know other founders from ASEAN. And also be mentored by really successful entrepreneurs from the region. I think that's what we have. We have a really excellent curriculum. So every week we have different categories of startups that will meet up and share knowledge together, and also mentors who have dedicated to come and teach sessions on specific topics.
Okay. What is your most important KPI as an accelerator? I mean, for example, as an investor, I always care about the, what is the successful fundraising ratio after your graduation?
Right.
Yeah.
So
do you have any other indicator?
Yeah. So even though we're government funded, we have to be commercially aligned to what investors want to see, right? So we always seek feedback from investors in terms of what kind of deals they're looking at, and we have a dedicated person doing those matchmaking connections, and we want to seed investors early on, so not just on a demo day, but even embedded in the early stages of the accelerator program to kind of like mentor the startups as well. And I think we expect to see about 20% of the startups graduating out of the accelerator, getting follow-on funding within 6 to 12 months after. And so we're going to run these batches twice a year. So 8 months out of a year, you will see at least 150 to 200 entrepreneurs at MaGIC in Cyberjaya.
Okay, okay. So let me go back to a little bit about your personal story. What makes you to go back to your hometown, Malaysia? Because you're a very successful entrepreneur in the US, and there is so many chance to work in the US, keep working in the US. So, I think this is just very symbolic and very good news for the Southeast Asian startups and founders, because the very talented, the good talent is coming back to Southeast Asia to do something, right? So what makes you to decide to go back?
Yeah,
I know you've asked a lot of time for this question.
This was a very popular question last year when I was speaking at Echelon as well.
Okay.
And everyone always asked me, why do I come back, right?
Yeah.
Well, firstly, I had a scholarship from the government, so I think at some point I told myself when I am successful in what I do, I should come back and give back. But I think there's always a timing to that, right? When? And I think I was at the peak of my career when I left Silicon Valley, but I did it because I thought it was very refreshing for the government a civil servant to come to Silicon Valley and speak to Malaysian entrepreneurs and ask us, hey, what should we do in Malaysia? What should we do for the startups? And I told them, developers, tech, you need to seed more engineers. But I think it was refreshing, and if you've read Brad Feld's book, Startup Communities, he writes that entrepreneurs should actually be leading startup ecosystems, and governments should be, seeding them. So should be providing the capital, infrastructure, the resources. And so at that point, I was like, I had to step up, right? If I believe in that, I should step up and take on that role. Like, who else would, right? I think it's really hard for an entrepreneur to be in a government setting, but if the government is taking a risk to hire an entrepreneur, I should take a risk on the government too. Okay. So that was the thinking behind it a year ago, right? And I think I don't see MaGIC as kind of a government entity. I see it as a hybrid between entrepreneurs and government, and kind of bridging that gap. And I see MaGIC as my next startup, because by definition, entrepreneurs seek a problem to solve, right? And my problem was, how do we, Malaysia, as I mentioned, have so many successful tech companies, but for some reason, we have not been visible. Investors have always surpassed Malaysia, and Indonesia has a bigger market, Thailand has interesting startups, but we always miss Malaysia. And I think there was an issue of visibility of our entrepreneurs. Maybe there wasn't a platform or community that was strong enough and that created that visibility. So I wanted to solve that problem for my country.
Right, I see. Great spirit. Okay, so I'd like to ask this question. So as venture capital, I see the three patterns among the founders in Southeast Asia. The one is the pure homegrown local entrepreneur. For example, in Indonesia, Indonesian local founder. And the second one is like Cheryl. So learned experience and work experience in other developed country. Most of them is in US. And the third pattern is the foreigner. Somehow foreigner end up to come here and do some business. So I've seen three patterns, and I've invested in those three patterns all. Some fail, some successful. And from your vision, especially, you're the two patterns. Pattern two, right? So you have experience, work and learn experience in US and back to your hometown. And it's not the start a startup, but start the venture backing. So what do you see those differences from those three entrepreneurs' patterns?
I should ask you that question since you invested in them. Well, I think definitely the entrepreneurs who've been abroad, either the US or like a regional, another country in Southeast Asia, and come back, have a different perspective on how to solve a problem, because you have that exposure, right? So I think that always makes you a better entrepreneur. But that doesn't mean local entrepreneurs who've never been outside can't succeed. So I don't think there's a formula for that. But I think that's why at MaGIC, I think we can play a role in terms of giving more exposure to startups. So we have three verticals at MaGIC. We educate, expose, and accelerate. So the MaGIC Accelerator program is the accelerate part. The expose part, we have a 3-year partnership with Stanford University. So we send entrepreneurs to Stanford, for Silicon Valley, for 2 weeks as an immersion program, partially at Stanford, partially visiting a lot of the startups in the valley. We also bring them here to TIA, and so we have a big booth, if you haven't noticed. So we wanted to, again, create visibility for Malaysian startups and expose them to a very robust ecosystem here in Singapore, which is, I think, 3 years ahead of us in some sense, right, in the venture capital sense. We also bring them to Jakarta if they're ready to expand to Indonesia. So I think sometimes not all of us are born with equal opportunity. Not all of us have the chance to go abroad to study. So as a government entity, this is where we can come in and provide them with that exposure.
I see, understood. Okay, so I'd like to ask a little bit about Malaysia. So Malaysia is a relatively very small country in terms of the size. So do you see the relatively small size country like maybe the South Korea or Malaysia, such kind of small country tend to produce the global, world-class startups?
Yeah.
Do you believe so, or
how else can we have 80% of the highest IPOs coming out of Malaysia, right? I think we do have founders who can be very successful. And I mean, if we can brand Singapore as the startup hub in Asia, and Singapore only has 5 million people. So nobody in Singapore is building a Singapore startup, right? It's always a Southeast Asian startup. And I think that's why, again and again, I would like to emphasize that we are not building country-specific startups anymore. We are past that. We need to get beyond that and start thinking ASEAN, Southeast Asia as a whole market. And so there's no like Singapore versus Malaysia anymore. And all these questions are so last year, right? Oh, are you trying to be another Silicon Valley here? I think those questions are irrelevant, and we should stop asking those questions. The questions that we should ask is, how do you build a regional company? What is the best way, where, and what kind of help and resources do you need to build successful regional companies? So I think those are the questions we need to start asking.
Okay, I gotta agree 100%. So, having said that, you know, it's very difficult to be the regional player, to be the global company is not easy job. And me, myself, is always struggling together with the founders to be the global player, regional player. If you dare to choose only one secret sauce, what can, you know, how can they achieve to be the global player?
So as much as our name is MaGIC, I don't believe in magic formulas or secret sauces.
I see.
I think it's about understanding the mechanics behind your startup. A lot of people tend to like, oh, you're just a copycat. You're just copying a model from the US or Europe or whatnot and building it here. You're not innovative, right? But I would argue there's nothing wrong about that. I think the exciting thing about Southeast Asia, and part of the reason why I'm back here in an emerging market, is that there's so much white space opportunity that has not been done. So I think it's okay to look at what is successful in abroad and apply it here, but localize it. But also, I like that because you're taking away the risk of the business model in some sense. There's so much risk running a startup. There's business model risk, there's operational risk, execution risk, founder risk, team risk, capital risk. So you're removing that risk by taking a model that has already worked, right? So I think the magic formula is really just to identify which model you're choosing and why. Why are you passionate about that? And then again, surround yourself with traction mentors and people who've already done this before. I think there is a formula actually to building a regional business, and you just need to network with the founders who have made it and learn what it is. I don't think it's rocket science. I think a lot of it is you do have to have big money behind you. So once you have raised some seed capital to validate your model, which I don't think enough founders do, to have real traction, real users, real sales, and then beyond that, raise the big money to go regional very quickly. So I think that's the key, is prove out a little bit and be really aggressive.
I see. They say we got to wrap up this one. So before the wrap up, is there any one single message you want to bring to the audience? I
think since the title of the talk today is about what's brewing in the Malaysian ecosystem, so I'll do a little plug on what else is happening here that could benefit the audience. So one exciting thing that we're co-announcing with MDEC, which is another government agency in Malaysia, is MSC status for startups. So this is kind of one of the benefits that any startup who's looking to expand to Malaysia or found a company in Malaysia can take advantage of. So MSC status is basically something that gives startups tax-free for 10 years. It also gives you the ability to employ foreign talent into the country, like engineers and whatnot. And so in the past, it's been tied to a cyber center or a location, cyber city. On May 12th, we're co-announcing with MDEC that we are removing that restriction, and so MSC status for startups is going to be a new category that startups can take advantage of. So please look out for that, MSC status for startups. And other stuff that's going on in our ecosystem, Game Founders is a Finnish game accelerator that is pretty well known in Europe. Also coming to Malaysia soon with MDEC, so please look out for that. And that's going to be a regional accelerator. Tune Labs, which is from AirAsia, is opening a regional travel accelerator. So there's a lot of regional vertical accelerators coming up in Malaysia that I'm personally pretty excited about, because I think what's more important here is that the private sector takes over, because that's more sustainable, and that creates a more strategic play in terms of corporations incubating startups that could be strategic to their businesses.
Okay, thank you very much. 30 minutes sharp. So thank you very much for the very insightful stories. Please round of applause to Cheryl. Thank you very much.
Thank you.